I used to think grief moved in straight lines. An arrival, a service, a list of phone calls, a box of ashes, or a mahogany problem that makes everyone kinder for a weekend. Then I checked into a hotel that used to be a railway station, and time put its hands on my shoulders and turned me in a slow circle until everything I thought I'd left behind was standing exactly where I started. My name is Lucas. My father's was Arthur to most people. Dad to me, even when we spent whole seasons talking about weather and oil changes, like those were safer synonyms for love. He died in February, unceremonious and absolute, and left me an apartment full of books and a storage unit full of things that used to be important to a man who could get sentimental about socket wrenches. Tucked into the will was a short line that looked like an afterthought and turned out to be an itinerary. Claim the suitcase in the station office at Hallowell Junction. Key in the top drawer of my desk. You'll know it when you see it. Hallowell Junction is 3 hours and a century east of where I live. The last passenger train pulled out in 1975. The station survived on stubbornness and was eventually reborn as the kind of boutique hotel where people pretend to be travelers in their own lives. The platform became a terrace for small weddings and big mistakes. The ticket window sells espresso now. Upstairs, where the station master used to sleep between departures, are rooms named after destinations long erased from maps. I booked 2 nights because grief felt like a task that needed a time frame, and because I wanted a place where the walls remembered departures as a skill. The hotel kept the old clock, the kind with a face large enough to make you honest about being late. The minute hand hesitated and then committed with a small clack, like a throat clearing. The station boards over the cafe bar still listed arrivals and departures in brass letters you could slide along a track with a fingertip. People pushed them around after their second drink. The bartender rolled his eyes in affection and then fixed them in the morning. The air smelled like varnish and steam you cannot have. At check-in, a woman with silver hair pinned into competence gave me a key on a heavy fob stamped with a number and a sparrow. Her name tag said Eveline, like a promise and an instruction. "Welcome to the Junction House," she said. "Your father was very clear we should expect you. He arranged—" She glanced down at a ledger that had more flourish than a tablet ever will. "Room 3 sleeper, 2 nights initially, and access to the station office." "My father arranged a room," I asked. "Last summer," she said. "He left a deposit and a note. He wrote that you would come when the season finally made sense. He had a way of putting time on a leash." "That sounds like something he'd say," I muttered, and the floor said nothing back. The station master's office sat behind a door made of glass and gumption. The original desk remained dark oak, edges softened by decades of elbows and other people's thinking. On it, a blotter with a calendar printed permanently in a year that ended before I began, and the quill holder used now by pens that do not require dramatics to work. There was a map of the county with spiderweb lines where tracks used to go, and the stubborn ghosts of stations that were now antique stores or churches, or the last good place to park on a fair day. The suitcase was exactly as expected and not at all. Brown leather whose handle had negotiated a treaty with time. Brass latches that would rather be shined than judged. A travel tag the color of old nicotine with the word Hallowell, typed in a font that used to believe in suit coats. On the handle, a cloth ribbon faded to a memory of burgundy. Attached to it, a small metal key wrapped in tape and labeled in my father's careful hand. Office safe. "May I?" I asked Evelyn, holding up the suitcase like a child who found contraband. "Your father prepaid a number of liberties," she said. "He trusted you with our ghosts." The office safe was exactly where the station master and me expected. Behind the ledger shelves, low to the floor, a metal box pretending not to know secrets. The key turned with the stubborn pleasure of things that remember what they are for. Inside, a stack of letters bound with twine, a trainman's pocket watch that had not been polite since 1961, and a folded manifest sheet in pale blue ink listing trains long gone. The letters sat with the gravity usually reserved for relics of a person who mattered in a war. They were addressed to me. Not to Lucas exactly, to L. Carr. That's my name. The postmarks were decades early. One said 1958, another 1949, the newest 1973. All the dates described years when my father had been alive, and I mathematically was not. I didn't open them in the office. I carried the bundle upstairs with that idiot reverence we reserve for proof of time travel and for babies. The sleeper room faced the disused tracks. The bed had brass rails like a polite echo of trains. A clock above the headboard ticked loud enough to be company. I sat with my back to the headboard and the suitcase between my knees like a confession. I untied the twine. The paper gave a soft cry where the knot had grown confident from years of being asked not to change. The first letter I chose wasn't the oldest or the newest. It was the one on top, because I lacked the philosophy for anything else. June 3rd, 1958. Hallowell Junction, 9:14 p.m. L. I am writing from the platform because the office lamp makes the walls too honest. The 9:05 freight is an hour late, and the conductor has the decency to look guilty. A girl in a yellow dress just asked me whether trains have a missing the way people do. I told her that steel does not ache. Men do. She laughed like I had given her a penny, and is now collecting cinders in her pocket as if the past can be domesticated. I am angry about something small and pretending it is something large, because small angers embarrass men who wear watches. The paper smells like coal because the night threw its hands up and went to bed without finishing the job. If you were here, I'd ask you whether it's still raining in our kitchen, and you'd answer something about the way the light hits the kettle. I'm sorry I left the way I did. The yellow dress girl just found a nail the length of my thumb and is holding it up like a trophy. The freight's headlight finally shows. Tell me how bad I am, and then tell me whether the sparrows still nest in the soffit above our window. I will read this when time forgives it. A. I read it twice and then a third time for the lines that felt like they knew something about me they weren't ready to confess. The handwriting was precise and impatient. Letters slanting like they were in a hurry to be true. A. At the bottom, the mark a thumb makes when ink decides to matter. He had signed it. A. Not Arthur. Not Dad. Someone who thought he was writing to a person with authority over him. I checked the envelope again because I wanted the world to make at least one obvious sense. The front said L. Car, CO Station Master's Office, Junction House Hotel. As if the building had been this building for 70 years, and as if the writer knew exactly where I would always be. The postmark was a date my father would have been 18, and I would have been a rumor between two stars. On the back flap, in smaller handwriting, in addition, open when the minute hand stutters. The clock in my room did that thing old clocks do when they decide to be dramatic. It paused, took a breath audible as a click, and then moved. I can offer you one of two sentences here. Either, this is coincidence, and I will keep a ledger of the ways I am fooled by coincidence until I become the kind of man who stops needing it. Or, the minute hand stuttered, and so did I. The second letter had a grease smudge that looked like the continent of grief. October 17, 1949, 3:36 a.m. It read like this. L. I put my ear to the rail tonight because a boy dared me and because it is a thing boys do after their fathers leave. If you have never done it, let me say the sound is not music. It's a bone remembering its first job. I heard the freight coming 10 minutes before the lantern did. It was a promise and a threat and a poem pretending not to be. There is a man asleep on the bench who smells like a sincere apology. I am supposed to go home and keep a promise I don't remember making. On the chalkboard in the office I wrote, no trains, weather. As if weather is the problem. The truth is I do not want to go home because the kitchen knows me better than the world does, and I am tired of being known. If this finds you, that means time is a circle, and I am less alone than the math suggests. A. On the third letter, the paper buckled where water had lived for a while. The date, May 1st, 1973. 2 years before the last passenger train, a century before I learned what it is to want to be good for a living. L. The station smells like spring and oil and bread because Mrs. Halver made sandwiches for the crew again. She cannot stop feeding men who pretend not to be hungry. A sparrow flew into the office this morning and knocked over the ink. I ought to be angry with it. I am not. It looked like a fact that couldn't fit. The 12:06 whistled even though the schedule insisted it should be modest. A woman bought a ticket to a town that no longer takes trains. I sold it to her anyway and told her the conductor would sort it out. She cried the way polite people do and thanked me for my kindness, as if I had invented time. I swear I saw you on the platform at noon with the coat you don't own yet. Don't laugh. You were holding a suitcase that looks like the one with the brass latches in my father's closet, and you looked at me like a person looks at a dog they had as a child and lost at a county fair. I wanted to call your name but didn't know which one you're using this year. Tell me this. Is the clock still slow on the third minute? A. I looked up because you do when a room suggests you're in it wrong. The clock wheezed and clacked. I ran my hand over the brass of the headboard like I might feel the heat of a person who had been here when they were still important. I went downstairs to the cafe because sometimes the only way to avoid drowning in your own house is to check whether other people are living. The cafe blackboard said Hallowell toast. In chalk so confident I wanted to eat the handwriting. The barista was a kid with the hair of a person who believes in poetry. He made my coffee and put a sugar packet on the saucer like a benediction. You're Arthur's boy, he said. He came in last July and told me to learn the difference between quiet and silence. I'm still working on it. What did he do here? I asked. He sat where you're standing and looked at the clock like two men in a room, the kid said. I liked him. He asked questions like he wanted to be corrected. In the office, Eveline tapped the day's reservations into a tablet and then wrote them in the ledger because she didn't trust easy backups. He told us to hold the office key for you, she said when I asked. He said you would try to be brave in the wrong way and then eat toast and get it right. You seem very certain my father knew me, I said. Your father knew people, she said. It made him wrong a lot. That's how you know a person is truly trying. Han, I took the letters out to the platform because the room felt narrow and because the air knew how to take part of what I was feeling and put it somewhere it could be seen. The old bench was the wooden kind that refuses to learn comfort. I sat and read without skipping because I am a coward about many things and a purist about few. In one letter on January 12, 1951, he wrote, I am afraid of my gentleness. I perform hardness because the world rewards it with obedience. If I were to hand you a list of the things I admire, your name would be written in the space where the ledger expects a sum. I am not drunk. I am simply awake at a time that asked for better men. In another, the ink trembled at the end of sentences that should have been steady. March 3, 1962. We named the boy Lucas. He arrived at a time when the trees shrugged on snow like a chore done out of respect. I held him and thought about rails, how they promise direction to people who are terrified of improvisation. I will promise direction to him until he is old enough to forgive me for not knowing what directions are for. If time is your country, send a letter to the future to tell him I tried. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the office window and laughed because I didn't have a better verb. My father had written to me before I existed. He had used a station as a post office for courage. The letters didn't ask for forgiveness. They auditioned for honesty. The sum of them left a thing in my chest that felt like a hand no one had remembered to place there at the right age. After lunch, I took the suitcase up to the room and opened it. Inside, a coat that would have fit my father and almost fit me, a man's hat that used to be an entire way of life, and a small black notebook with squared pages. On the first page in the character, a pencil develops when it meets a hand that learned to press too hard. Timetable. Personal. Underneath, a list of dates and a single sentence for each. Upkit to 1749. Ear to rail. Heard future. Proof. June 3, 58. Girl with nail. Confession aborted. Nov 5, 61. Boy sleeping on bench. A sign. Told him to go home. May 1st, 73, L on platform, older, coded, clock stuttered. Augie 1290, return, cafe not coffee, still hear trains. I flipped forward in my own name. Lucas appeared in pencil in a handwriting that wasn't mine and was mine shaped by the wrong decade. Feb 17, 2024, L will come for the case. Leave the key. Tell Eveline. Do not be afraid of the long letter. I put the notebook down like you put down a hot pan. The clock hit 3:36 and did a small stutter. A kid's laughter flew up through the stairwell and broke into dust in the light. I had the sudden, embarrassing urge to run out of the hotel, out of the story, out of the skin in which a man could be expected to become his father's pen pal. I walked the platform instead. The tracks stopped before the road. Beyond them, a field pretending at neutrality. A sparrow considered me from the soffit like a landlord. A man in a conductor's cap he had not earned took wedding photos leaning against a rail car the hotel kept for nostalgia. The sky wore a color that a painter would have called smoke, and a meteorologist would have called low ceiling, and a writer would have tried not to use because it's too obvious. Back in the room, I opened another letter. June 14, 1958, that had been tucked behind a copy of Railway Age. The envelope was addressed in my father's hand, but in the wrong direction, like it had been repurposed. Inside, a letter to my mother. Eleanor, I bought peaches on my way home because the box said they had been touched by actual sun. I am writing from the station office at the half hour because everything honest happens at the half hour. I want to tell you, I saw our future on the platform in the shape of a man who hasn't been built yet. I know how that sounds. I am not ill. I am simply tired enough to tell you a truth that doesn't like day. He carried a suitcase like mine and looked at me like a person looks at a town they are about to leave. I thought I had the wrong life for a minute. Then the freight moaned and time resumed, and I remembered I promised to be the sort of man who does not put his strangenesses on the table unless he has peeled the fruit and served it nicely. I will be home by 8. If the sparrows have decided we are not worth their time, I will not take it personally. Ishurum. I had never seen my father write to my mother like a person who believed she could handle what he was. In the letters I had from later years, rent receipts and notes about whether to pick up milk, he called her Ellie and asked questions like a man who preferred answers that cost nothing. Here he is, younger than my understanding, speaking to her like she knows where the knives go. Time tilted. I set the letter aside because my throat was attempting something it hadn't contracted for. At dusk, the hotel rang a bell that used to mean boarding and now meant wine on the terrace. Guests came like moths toward light because people prefer scheduled joy. I walked the length of the platform and back to the office where Eveline was pulling a fitted sheet onto the idea of mourning. Is there a way, I asked, to know whether a man is the sort who writes letters to the future because he is brave or because he is afraid? She tucked the corner of the sheet with righteous competence. Both, she said. The difference is where he posts them. A brave man delivers them in person and risks the room. A frightened man uses trains. I laughed because she earned it. Did he ever mail any? Once, she said. To himself. It came back marked forwarding order expired. He put it in the safe with the others and told me the post office is the most honest institution we've got because it returns what you cannot convince time to accept. I slept shallowly, like a person guarding a fire they didn't start and don't know how to sustain. At 2:10 a.m., the old clock did its click-clearing of throat and then stopped as if embarrassed in front of time. I opened my eyes into a room that seemed more crowded than architecture allowed. There is a version of this story where I saw a man in the chair by the window reading a letter and where he looked like my father and where we spoke in a language made of apologies. That didn't happen. What did? I got up and put my ear to the door as if trains still ran. The hallway held nothing but the sound of a refrigerator trying to forgive its age. I sat at the desk and took out a sheet of hotel stationery that tries too hard and wrote a letter anyway. February 23rd, 2024, 2:17 a.m. I found your letters in the office safe, and I am angry and grateful in equal measure. You wrote to me as if I could do anything about a decade I missed by a whole other person's childhood. You wrote to me because you didn't write to the right rooms. I'm trying not to be you in the wrong way. I came because you told me to. I'm leaving tomorrow because the real job is not to be held by a station. It's to go home and say the long version out loud to people who have to hear it. The minute hand stuttered. I listened. You said I would know the suitcase when I saw it. I knew. If time is a circle, then this is a loop I need to close. If time is a line, then this is me drawing an arrow back to a man who wanted to be a good father and preferred trains to conversations. I will try to post this where it belongs. EL. I put it in an envelope and addressed it to the office safe because I am not above ceremony. In the morning I gave it to Eveline. She did not open it in front of me because she is a keeper of vows. I will put it with the others, she said, and with the ones you have not yet written. What do you mean, I asked, and she smiled around the edges like people do when they decide to risk being fanciful. There is a stack, she said, in the suitcase. It is under the lining. Letters in your hand dated in years I stubbornly do not yet recognize. They say things like, tell him to sit with his boy at the kitchen table and listen to the long answer about school, even if it is boring. They say, do not write the letter you could say out loud and paying attention. They say, the train is not coming back. Stop waiting for it like a saint. I went upstairs and lifted the lining. And yes, there they were. Envelopes addressed to A. In my handwriting, the one that arrives when I take too long to write a grocery list. The postmarks had not happened yet. The ink smelled fresh because it was. The first line of the top letter read, June 3rd, 1958. You owe her peaches and the truth about why you forget to chew between sentences. I put my head in my hands and laughed until it wasn't a laugh. Here is the neat satire of all this. I probably wrote them at my kitchen table last fall when Dad was in the hospital and I was pouring sentences into notebooks so I wouldn't pick fights with nurses. I probably put them in the suitcase a month ago while searching his desk for anything like a childhood he might have felt safe to share. I probably meant to decide later whether to send them and then let grief pick the route. Or, time is larger than the room we keep it in, and a station renovated for other people's anniversaries became a post office for two men who wanted to be good and kept choosing distance over depth until it almost ruined us. I took the letters back to the office and returned them to the safe. I left one on the desk under the blotter calendar, turned to 1958. The Peaches won. I turned the brass letters on the cafe board to read arrival, 2:17 and departure, when ready, which is a bad joke and a good instruction. I went for a walk along the old right-of-way, now a path where people pretend to be fitness and then remember that walking is simply what legs do. The ghost of the track shone under a frost that had decided not to commit. I thought about how much of my life I had framed as a project when it would have been wiser to practice being a room. When I came back, there was a man my age at the counter holding a ticket-shaped receipt printed on cardstock for romance. He had a boy with him, 5 or 6, with a knit hat that made his ears look like parentheses. The boy pressed his face to the big clock's post like kids do when they want to learn whether history has a texture. The man looked at me with the cautious friendliness of people who want their kids to see the world as an invitation. Is there a train? The boy asked the room. Once, I said. You can hear it if you put your ear on the wood. He did, serious as an apprentice. His father smiled in my direction like I had not ruined the day. My dad used to bring me here to watch the last freight go through, the man said. He'd time it. The minute hand always hesitated on the 3rd minute. We'd wait for it to commit. He said, that's how you know a thing is real. It still does, I said. The boy announced, I hear it, because children are kind to the truths adults suggest. I checked out after breakfast, which was an omelet so perfectly folded, it made me suspicious of the chef's personal life. Eveline slid a folded paper across the counter under the receipt the way a dealer passes a card to someone who understands stakes. From the office, she said. From the past or the future, depending on your posture. It was under the blotter this morning. I took it to the platform because that is where what matters is supposed to be read. It was a note in my father's hand, small and stubborn. L. If you're reading this, it means I finally mailed something to the right place. You asked me once why I wrote to you across time instead of across a table. I didn't know how to put my face on a sentence that might make you leave. Now I know leaving isn't something a letter can prevent. A man leaves by inches or not at all. I'm sorry I chose inches in seasons when I owed you strides. Here is the long version, short because I've run out of stamps. I was afraid of being boring in front of you. The station taught me that schedules make men brave when they are cowards, and I spent too long pretending to be a schedule. You should know I saw you on the platform once, coat older than your age, and you looked at me like I had survived you. I think we both did a little. Take the suitcase. Fill it with letters you are brave enough to post in person. When the minute hand stutters, be the man who says the thing out loud anyway. Dad. I stood there with the paper in my hands and the old clock listening. I had the childlike urge to hand the note to someone in uniform for validation, because we let strangers certify our lives when we are unsure of the signature. I put it in my pocket instead and touched the outline like a person checks for a wallet before boarding. On my way out, I stopped in the office. The safe sat open, mouth like a square jaw. I put one of my letters to Aorn on top of the stack. Then I closed the safe, spun the dial the way television taught me, and left the key where my father had told me to find it, taped under the drawer, in reach in case the next version of us needs it. The parking lot was half ice, half enthusiasm. I put the suitcase in the trunk the way a person puts a baby into a car seat for the first time. Clumsy, prayerful, slightly unnecessary. When I turned the ignition, the clock in the car did its own little stutter because all clocks conspire, and I laughed finally, the kind of laugh that stands upright. 2 hours into the drive, I pulled into a diner that promised coffee and kept half the promise. I wrote my mother a letter on a napkin because some apologies deserve worse paper. I told her Dad had left me a suitcase and a way to stop using trains to deliver sentences. I told her I was sorry I spent long conversations with her adjusting the salt shaker instead of asking which book she was rereading, because the ending made more sense at 70 than it did at 30. I texted my partner Naomi and asked if we could make Sunday letters official, like a superstition. She texted back a picture of her hand in sunlight and wrote, "Yes, write me rooms I can live in." When I got home, the apartment was honest in the way rooms are when they know you are coming back different. The kitchen had the light my father used to call coffee-colored, which is an absurd thing to call light and perfectly correct if you grew up in a house that believed in mornings. I put the suitcase on the table and let it be the centerpiece, because grief gets to decorate for a while. Then I made tea. The kettle sang in the key of patience. I wrote the long version out loud to nobody, and then to Naomi when she came in. I told her about the letters in the station and the boy with the knit hat hearing trains in wood. I told her about the way the minute hand hesitated and how the world seemed to wait for me to decide whether to be a better man or a busker with words. She listened with her whole face. When I finished, she took the pocket watch from the suitcase and wound it. It ticked like a creature that had found a lap. "He wrote you before you were born because he loved you before he knew how," she said. "You can be angry about the order. That's fair. But don't waste the inheritance." "What's the inheritance?" I asked. "A place to put the sentences you're brave enough to say in the right rooms," she said, because she is patient with my dramatics and because she earned the right to name the moral. On my first Sunday home, I put an envelope addressed to A. CEO Station Master's Office, Hallowell Junction, into the mail. It will come back probably. Forwarding order expired. I will put it in the safe if I am allowed to, or keep it on my desk if I am not. On my second Sunday home, I put a different letter on the kitchen table for Naomi and signed it without abbreviations. On the third, I wrote nothing because we were tired and bored and busy with the ordinary chores of not ruining what we are making, and I said the long version out loud while we waited for rice to decide to become dinner. Sometimes when the apartment is too warm and the radiator performs history, the minute hand on the cheap clock above the stove stutters on the third minute like it is remembering a nicer room. When it does, I put my hand on the table and say something brave in the smallest possible way. "I am afraid of being boring in front of you." Or, "I want you to ask me the long question about work even if it makes us hate capitalism together." Or, "I saw a boy in a hat today pretending to hear trains, and it made me want to be the sort of man who promises direction without lying." The sentences survive in the air, or they don't. If they do, I keep them. If they don't, I try again with less performance. I don't know if time is a circle. I know stations hold it like a bowl holds water, briefly and with shape. I know my father was a man who sharpened pencils to points that felt like answers, and that his letters were a way of keeping trains running inside himself long after the tracks gave up. I know I am a man who wanted to be good so badly I kept picking the most visible method. I know that the best inventory I made at Hallowell wasn't of letters but of verbs. Write, mail, say, hold, listen, forgive, try repeat. The Junction House will sell out for weddings in June. The brass letters will keep their promises. The kid at the cafe will learn the difference between quiet and silence and forget who taught him, because that's how our best teachers earn their rest. Eveline will age exactly the way competence does, beautifully and without apology. Someone will move the brass letters back after a second drink and believe they have changed the future because the board says so. The clock will stutter on the third minute, like it's telling anyone listening that now is as good a time as any to choose which direction is for leaving and which is for returning. There is a man who will check into room 3 next winter under a name that feels like a coat. He will open the safe and find letters bound in twine and decide whether his throat can stand it. Maybe they will be mine. Maybe they will be someone else's and still be mine, because time is generous with aliases. If he writes one more, if he adds a page in a new hand, I hope he posts it in person at a kitchen table that smells like tea and the honest boredom of two people keeping a life. Today, the minute hand stuttered over the stove, and I said the brave thing without writing it down first. I told Naomi I want a child, and I am terrified of loving him like a timetable. She said we can teach each other how to be delays without making apology a language. She put the station master's pocket watch on the shelf above the calendar and said, "He can keep time. We will keep the rest." The suitcase lives by the door now, not as a threat or a promise, as a reminder. When I pass it, I think, trains don't come here anymore. The station is a hotel. The track is a path. The office is a room where letters learn whether they can survive without envelopes. The safe is a throat that has finally learned where to send what it holds. And I am a man who knows that if the minute hand stutters, I can still put the truth in the air with the unnecessary courage of living men. And if it survives, I will not need a stamp. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. It means a lot. New stories like this one are posted every single day, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one. And if this story touched you, please give it a like. It really helps more people find our content.